Hi everybody and welcome to webinar 46. Tonight we are discussing building a body of theory, and as you all join in the room, I would like to know a nice simple question for tonight. Where in the world are you? What's your job role and what have you had for your tea? And I'm asking you that because people say that that's what I ask you and I generally don't, but tonight I'm asking you, what have you had for your tea? Where in the world are you? And what kind of job do you have? So I'm going to look in the chat and I'm going to see what people are saying. Let's have a look. So we've got 116 people and it's coming up for 4 minutes past 7. So I'm going to hand over to you, Siobhan, and I'm going to read what everyone's having for the tea.
Okay, thank you very much, Kelly. I just dipped into the chat earlier because, you know, I can't normally read it when I'm presenting, but I just dipped in and there was I'm sure it was a practice educator, and she said what she said for a tea was ginger nut biscuits. And I was thinking, I don't know if that fully counts as tea. Yeah, I think you might need to have something more just in terms of self-care. I don't know, but ginger nut biscuits sounds fabulous, but I'm hoping you can have something more for your tea later. Okay, so tonight then we are going to be looking at building a body of theory. It's a back to basics webinar session because we know sometimes these are particularly popular. People like the back to basics, and we're going to be looking at theory and practice. And building a body actually refers to a particular activity or exercise that I think can be really useful to help people think about how to apply theory to practice. So when we were planning the sessions, then, you know, we always kind of, the team said, let's have a back to basics at this point. So I said, oh, well, let's do a body one. So I then put into our WeChat, WhatsApp group, I put into the chat, who wants to share their body at the webinar, and it went very quiet and people were a bit like, what are you asking us to do, Siobhan? So just, I may, if I'm, you know, sometimes my language tonight, if I talk about presenting a body or sharing a body, or it's a safe activity to engage in. Okay, but thankfully Dave, Becky and Kulchuma agreed to talk about the activity tonight and share their body, but it's a body of theory that they're going to be sharing with you tonight. So this is a particular activity. I think those of you who are students are going to find this helpful to think about how you could develop a body of theory, but also those of you who are practice educators might think about how you might be able to use this in your work with students. So the idea is, as the picture that Dave has drawn for us there for the building a body, the idea is to work through head, heart and hands. And that's a framework that you have probably heard of before. Essentially, it's a framework that we use to describe the active parts of human presence, being present in a session. It's bringing your whole body. It's about bringing your head, bringing your heart, bringing your hands into something. So head, heart, hands can help us to think about how do we bring our whole self to our practice. In terms of social work, sort of the most closely related field, really, we hear head, heart, hands talked about a lot in terms of social pedagogy. So if you want more information about the actual framework and how it's generally used, you would go there really and look there. But actually, that's not where it comes from. You know, a lot of people say, well, head, heart, hands, it comes from pedagogy, but it doesn't. It's been around for years. It actually comes from ancient Greek philosophy. There's a lot of argument and discussion really about where does that phrase head, heart, hands come from. And some people even give credit to the Dalai Lama. So, you know, this is a huge thing. Head, heart, hands. What I'm going to do tonight is share with you how I have adapted head, heart, hands as a framework into our thinking about theory, so that we can think about how do we bring our whole self to our practice, how do we bring our whole theory self into practice. But head, heart, hands in itself is a framework that you could use in many different ways. I've actually seen a book recently where I think it's head, heart, hands was used to really good effect to take, it's not really a social work book, but it was taking a critical stance about exploring how society will be set up after COVID has gone through. It was really looking at, you know, people who use their hands are the people who've seen us through COVID in many ways. It's very much looking at the way in which society is set up and what forms status, I suppose, if you like, and an interesting read. So head, heart, hands can be used in a whole range of ways. In fact, there's a poem that we refer to in Share, the model that we've talked about in some of our webinars, which is written by, I've not been able to attribute where it comes from. I've just seen it, and it's attributed to a Canadian student with a learning disability. But this poem, I think, is a brilliant poem for us to think about as social workers, but it also illustrates head, heart, hands, and how we need to bring our whole self into everything that we do as social workers. So the poem is, to work with me, you have to listen to me. And you can't just listen with your ears because it'll go to your head too fast. You have to listen with your whole body. And if you listen slow, some of what I say will enter your heart. And I think that's a beautifully put poem to show head, heart, and hands coming together, and how that comes in everything that we do. When we listen to people, we need to listen with our head, with our heart, and with our hands, because then what do we actually do? What do we go on and do afterwards when we've listened to somebody, if we're truly hearing them? So head, heart, hands is a framework that you can use in a range of different ways, and I think it's a fabulous framework. And we're not specifically going to look at the head, heart, hands framework tonight, but I wanted to say it can be used in a whole range of ways. What we're going to do is another activity that you can use to help you to think about, how am I using theory? How do I connect theory into my practice? How can I talk to my practice educator about theory? How can I write my assignment based around theory? That's the activity that I'm going to try and give tonight, or explain tonight. And in some ways it builds on from webinar. The webinar that we did, actually it doesn't have the number on here, does it? But it was the webinar, our 17th webinar that we did in September last year, where we used the analogy of a picnic of theory, and we used a couple of activities that night. So we looked at the envelope activity that you can do to help you to think about theory, and we also looked at building a tree, helping you to think about creating a theory tree, and that was another activity that I use sometimes. So you can watch it back on YouTube if you missed it first time, but there are at least 2 other activities that you could use there to think about planning assignments and to think about improving your theory informed practice. And I know that lots of the team members have found some of those activities from that webinar useful in their placement, for example. But specifically tonight, we're going to look at a different activity that we didn't do in the picnic, the theory picnic webinar, partly because it's an activity that probably takes a little bit longer to explain, and so we wanted a whole webinar to go through this particular activity. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at building a body of theory. How do you think about bringing your whole self into your use of theory in practice? So your head represents the theory that you're using, because a theory helps you to understand what's happening. It guides and influences your thinking. So theory is all about your thinking and your understanding. So that goes on in your head, if you like. So the head part of this framework represents the theory that you're going to use in practice. The heart, that represents your overall approach to practice. What makes you tick? What's the beating heart that sits at the center of the way you like to do things, your overall approach to your practice? So the heart represents your approach. The hands, that represents the model that you're going to use to intervene in a situation, because the hands, I suppose, and the model, it's all about what you actually do, the hands-on work, what you're actually doing in this situation, and that's represented by the model that you choose. And then in the hands, the other hand, there's a tool. Oh, I meant to ask the team earlier what kind of tool that is, because I wished it was a hammer or something. I'd know what that was. I don't know if it's not a screwdriver. I think, well, you can decide in the chat. I just saw the chat zoom up, so maybe people have put in the chat. Anyway, there's a tool in the other hand, and the tool, that represents the method. The method is really a specific skill or intervention or something specifically that you do. Now, the method is generally drawn out of a model, but sometimes you use a method that comes from somewhere else. So that's a tool in your hands. So what we're going to do to start the webinar off is I'm going to take you through some of the approaches that social workers use, some of the theories we use, some of the models, and a few methods. And then we're going to start to think about, okay, how do we build all of that up into a body of theory? And Dave is going to share with you in a little while his overall kind of general body of theory. And Becky and Kulchuma are going to share with you a context-specific bodies of theory. And then I'm going to share with you how you might use this to think about a particular piece of work. So maybe if you're given a case study at university, how might you apply and develop a body of theory that you can use in a particular piece of work or case study or assignment? So we're going to help you to build your own body of theory. That's what we're going to do in this session. And in the session, if you want to ask any questions, use the Q&A function. And at the end of the presentation, hopefully we'll get time to go in and look at the Q&A function. But if you've got questions for Dave, Becky or Kulchuma about the bodies that they're sharing later, then you can ask those in the chat and they'll be able to answer the questions in the chat. So let's start off with thinking about your heart. And this is really all about what sits at the very heart of your practice, or if you like, the center of your practice. I'm trying to think of different ways to help you to explore this. What is your heart? But maybe it's about what makes you tick, what keeps your practice pumping. You know, if you were at our webinar last week, which was a fabulous webinar about the theory and practice of co-production, Sarah from Social Work Voices last week said social workers need to put their heart into practice. And that's really true. You know, we need to bring our heart into practice. So in terms of thinking about theory-informed practice, the heart is all about your overall approach. How do you go about doing things? How do you approach your work? Okay, so that's your first question really for building your body. Start off with your heart, because that's, you know, the main organ, I suppose. So start off with your heart and think about what's your overall approach to practice. And these are some approaches. Okay, I've listed for you a few approaches, a few models, a few methods in the webinar. We've drawn these out of social work theory cards. I think most of the team, when they put their body together, have been using the theory cards. So all of these, I can't clearly, in a webinar of this length, I clearly can't go through all of these with you. But what I can do is suggest that these are maybe some of the contemporary approaches that you might see being referred to in social work. So we talk a lot, don't we, about using a person-centered approach. There's lots of conversations about having a solution-focused approach, or a trauma-informed approach seems to be very contemporary, very much in the sort of main eye of social work at the moment. A strengths-based approach, or the opposite of that, would be described as a deficit-based approach. Systemic approach, sometimes ecological approach, they're quite similar, they're quite closely related. A protectionist approach. I mean, a lot of people may not be so familiar with a protectionist approach, but it's essentially where what we do is we focus on protection. Sometimes it becomes a bit risk averse because it's all just about protecting somebody, maybe wrapping somebody in cotton wool, not enabling risk, not enabling learning from risk. But equally, a protectionist approach could also be used to describe when we're working in multidisciplinary teams, how maybe, you know, I don't know, health and social care are discussing who's going to fund this, and it becomes very protectionist. Health are protecting their funding and social work are protecting their funding, and that could be used to describe a protectionist approach. So there's kind of two ways of looking at a protectionist approach. Relationship-based approach, people talk about that all the time, but sometimes I think it's almost a bit of a throwaway. Are they really being relationship-based? How do you know? Is it just they're chucking that in, you know, because it sounds good? Restorative approach is very big at the moment. Lots of local authorities will say this is our approach to practice, restorative approach. There's a behaviourist approach, a hopeful approach. Some of these we're going to talk about and revisit later when we talk about our bodies of theory, but I'm just kind of throwing in as some examples so that if people are thinking, what do you mean by the heart? What do you mean by an approach? Here are some examples. And again, either if you have the Social Work Theory app, or if you've got the theory cards, you could look at more detail on these if you want to have more detail. Then I've put contextual safeguarding at the bottom. And the reason that I've put contextual safeguarding there was on purpose, because all of the others finish with the word approach, you know, person-centered approach, solution-focused approach. So obviously they're an approach. So if you're a student trying to work out what's an approach, don't think to yourself, well, everything that's got approach written after it is an approach and anything else is something, because some things don't have the word approach written, but they are an approach. So contextual safeguarding is an overall approach of looking at safeguarding in a different way, of drawing on the context. So it's an approach, but it doesn't say approach at the end of it. So it doesn't have to say the word approach at the end to be an approach. Another point to make about approaches is that sometimes we could be talking about formal approaches that have been written about by academics or writers. You know, all of these here, you could go off and read about these in a textbook, or, you know, you could trace them back to particular writers, have a, you know, particular name in this area and are seen as a, you know, a trauma-informed approach. You could say very much Karen Treisman and Lisa Cherry, very much in that kind of, they're seen as the real writers in that area. So you could pick out particular people who are seen as really influential in that area. But equally, you could be drawing on what we might call more of an informal approach, an approach that you have decided, you've maybe pulled together. It describes how you go about your work. The thing is, though, when you're a student, you're really needing to draw on, if you like, formal approaches that are there, that have been tried and tested and people know about, especially when you're writing an assignment. But over time, I think within work, as you grow and you develop your practice wisdom, you'd start to pull together your own approach, which actually might take bits out of all of these, and you pull together your approach that really works for you in practice. And then the final thing I want to say about an approach here is how it really links into your heart. Is I'm going to take you right back to my very first job as a qualified social worker. Okay, my very first job, I worked in the old, very large stay. I worked in the old Victorian asylums, and they were closing down at the time. It was the implementation of the NHS and Community Care Act. That's how long I've been around. And I was called a resettlement officer, and I was allocated to work with a specialist ward. It was known as the specialist behaviourist ward. I was told staff there are highly skilled and highly trained in behaviourist approaches, and that was quite new to me at that time. That place was the most oppressive environment that I have ever been into from then to now. You know, to earn, if you were a patient, because they were called patients, the people that lived there, and they'd lived there sometimes for years and years and years. If you wanted to, say, have a cigarette, you had to act in a certain way, behave in a certain way, get a certain number of ticks on a, you know, a list. And then to get a lighter, it was almost impossible to get a cigarette and a light at the same time. I mean, the ways in which you had to behave, you know, was so prescribed. And yet the staff would sit around on a table in the middle of the ward smoking all day. And to me, it was the most oppressive place that I had ever been. So to me, I've been left with a really bad flavouring, if you like, of behaviourist approach. To me, it kind of sits really uncomfortably, and I just cannot put my heart into a behaviourist approach because I was given such a bad experience of it in the past. So you have to feel like this fits with me. This approach really fits with me and the way I want to work, and I feel comfortable with this approach. That's what you want to be looking for. And you can only find that if you read around them, if you explore that, if you listen to our webinars and the different approaches that we talk about within the webinars, for example. So that's your heart. Okay. What about your head? What does your head mean in terms of theory? I love Dave's doing a bit of a dance for us there with his head. How do you know what's happening? This is the head bit, really. How do you see this situation? How are you viewing it? How do you understand the people that are involved, the situation that they find themselves in? It's all about your understanding. It's about your thinking. What do you think is going to happen next? You know, can you predict what might be happening next? All of that, that is the theory. So your head represents your thinking and how you understand what's going on. In science, a theory is seen as helping you to describe something, explain something, and predict what's going to happen next. So in social work, that's very much really what a theory is about. It's about our thinking and our understanding. So the kinds of theories you might be building in your head. And again, I mean, literally the theory cards, there's 101 cards, aren't there? So there are loads of theories that you can draw on. But here's some, examples around things like attachment theory, social learning theory, systems theory, theories around grief and loss, which are changing quite a lot at the moment. Our understanding of those theories are changing quite a lot at the moment. Cognitive dissonance, theories around child development, adult development, human growth and development, really. Bowen theory, I think it's a particularly good theory if you're working with siblings. That's one I would recommend taking a look at. Othering is important theory. Critical race theory, which has become very contemporary, very important at the moment to think about critical race theory. But then I've put in attribution theory as the final theory on the list. And I wanted to talk to you tonight a little bit about attribution theory, because this is actually one of my favorite theories. It's so useful in social work. We can use it in so many different ways. But attribution theory is actually really poorly understood, I think. And when I talk to social work students and social workers about theory, they very infrequently will they say they're using an understanding of attribution theory, and yet it's such a powerful theory and it's so helpful to us in so many ways. So I want to just explore with you, as an example, because it's a personal favourite, what attribution theory is all about, because I think this will help you to recognise this is about our head, it's about our thinking, it's about how we think about things, because it's a theory and that's what theories do, they help us to think. And essentially, attribution theory is based on whether we internalize our understanding of something or whether we externalize. So do we internalize or externalize? It's drawn from psychology. And often when you read about it, it's explained in it's a very wordy way. I think even when I've reread things that I've written about attribution theory, I'm not sure that I've written it in a way which is particularly understandable. I think it's one that's difficult to understand in words, really. So I want to try and give it to you in pictures, okay? I want you to think of attribution theory using an analogy. And the analogy that I'm going to use is, I want you to think about driving, okay? I want you to just imagine yourself driving your car, okay? Just imagine I'm driving my car and I've come up to a roundabout. It's one of those roundabouts that's got, the roundabouts that's got loads and loads of different exits off it. They're really complicated, really complex to find your way around. Now, the theory says that we externalize our own behavior, but we internalize the behavior of others. So if I can try and explain that to you, you find yourself in the wrong lane of the roundabout. The theory is that your ordinary thought, the immediate thought is, this roundabout's really badly signposted. What you do is you blame the roundabout. You're in the wrong lane, but it's the roundabout's fault. Okay, it's the roundabout. It's the external factor. But if you're in the right lane and someone else is in the wrong lane, the thought process is, they're a really bad driver they are. They can't get themselves in the right lane of the roundabout. So the theory goes that what we do is we externalize our own behavior, but we internalize the behavior of others. So we begin to blame them for their behavior. Now, straight away, that's really interesting to us as social workers, because we seek not to do that. We spend years trying to learn how we don't lay blame on individuals, how we're not judgmental, how we look at people's environments, how we don't just blame the driving, we also look at the roundabout, all of those kinds of things. But it's a really interesting theory and it goes deeper. Don't judge my driving, okay, on what I'm going to say, but imagine me driving my car. I'm in the right lane of the roundabout. I look to my side and there is someone who is clearly in the wrong lane of the roundabout. And I think to myself, let's imagine I look at them and it's a middle-aged woman and she's driving an old banger of a car and she looks like she's had a long day at work. I think to myself, poor woman, this roundabout's really badly signposted. I'll let her in. Because she's similar to me, I'm more likely to be able to externalize her behavior and blame it on the roundabout. But on another occasion, I'm in the right lane. I look to my side and this time it's a young lad and he's driving some kind of souped up car with, all alloy wheels and he's playing really loud music. It's going bang, bang. And I think to myself, if he thinks he's getting in here, he's got another thing coming. They think they're on the road, those BMW drivers or whatever kind of car it might be. That's what I would think. It's the bit about, he is different to me. the more different he is to me, the more likely I am to internalize, to blame him for his behavior. And that's why othering is so dangerous. When we see people as very different to us, we are more likely to lay blame on them for the circumstances they find themselves in, rather than recognizing, actually, this is all about the environment. It's not all about the individual. So that's where it becomes really interesting, but it goes further and it goes deeper. It helps us to think about, let's imagine two people are going to sit their driving test, okay? One of these people has a very high self-esteem, feels great about themselves, is really well supported. They sit their driving test. What they do is they internalize success, they externalize failure. So they pass their driving test. They say, I passed my driving test because I'm such a good driver. If they fail their driving test, they'll say, I failed my driving test because the driving teacher put me in too soon. I had a rubbish teacher, or the instructor was too picky, or there's a lot of blame on external factors. Then you've got another person who perhaps has had different previous experiences, is a different individual. They sit their driving test. They will do the opposite. They will internalize failure. They will externalize success. So they'll say, I failed the driving test because I'm a really rubbish driver. Or they'll say, I passed my driving test because I had a really nice examiner, or I had a great teacher, or I passed my driving test, it was a fluke, I wouldn't be able to do it again. What they're doing is they're internalizing failure, they're externalizing success. This is all about, the phrase that's used in psychology is the person's locus of control. Do they internalize or externalize what's going on for them? And this is a brilliant theory for us to understand in so many ways. It can be applied. Our understanding can be used in so many different ways. Think about, I've worked many times with people where they've experienced domestic violence, but they'll say, oh, it's my fault they hit me because I didn't have the tea ready in time, or it's my fault they hit me because I pushed their buttons. Or there's this whole thing about internalizing abuse. Rather than recognizing this is abusive behavior, internalizing it. So internalizing and externalizing attributions is a really important thing for us to understand as social workers. So this is a theory that is so good and has so much to offer our thinking, but it illustrates it's a theory because it doesn't tell you what to do about it. It doesn't tell you how to bring about any change. It's a theory, so it helps our thinking, okay? So I wanted to give that as an example of a theory. I'm going to go on now. We've done the heart, our overall approach. The head is our theory. Let's take a look at the rest of the body. What about our hands? Our hands are all about how do we describe what we are actually doing in practice, our hands-on, how we describe our intervention. What's helping to guide you or structure what you're doing? Maybe what does the organisation want you to do and how do they want you to do it? Because sometimes models are given to you by the organisation. What do you think works in the situation? It's all about your model. The hands represents the model that you're going to use. And just some examples of models, the kinds of models. Again, I can't in a webinar of an hour long go through these, but these are just some examples. You've got different models of assessment. You've got different models that we might approach. We might think about disability with different models. We did a whole webinar on that, didn't we? But, you know, if you look at the medical model, the social model, share, again, we've got lots of webinars that we've done previously that you can watch back on YouTube that look at these models. So we've done one on models of disability. We've done one on share model. So we've got lots of ways that you could explore these more, but these are all models: task-centered practice, crisis intervention, family group conferencing. Prospera Tedham's 4D2P model that she introduced to us in the anti-racist follow-up webinar, motivational interviewing, signs of safety, personal recovery model. These are all examples of models that social workers might use or draw on in their practice. But then if you remember back to the little body of theory, there was a tool in one of the hands, because the hands is about your model, but then the tools, well, what techniques are you actually using in your practice? What if you had to specifically pinpoint something that you've done you know, what would that be? I did this particular thing, or I used this particular way of communicating, this particular method in my communication, or perhaps it's what's influencing the skills that you're using. The tools are about the specific methods that you're using. That's your method, the specific tools or techniques that you're using in practice. So again, just to outline a few as examples, then you might, I'm trying to outline some of the ones that are perhaps the most well known and you perhaps would have come across, but GEMS, questioning techniques, which is a particular way of asking questions. So if I went out with, I don't know, perhaps I'm doing a direct observation of a student's practice. If I saw the student asking something like, what are you hoping to achieve? What goals in life do you have? Or if I saw them saying, you know, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? I can see then that they are using GEMS question techniques, a particular kind of question technique. Developing working agreements is a method that comes from task-centered practice, because in task-centered practice, there's a lot of talk at the beginning about developing your agreement. Eco maps, genograms, these are all methods that social workers use. Strengths mapping, which is a way of mapping people's strengths. Particular direct work techniques that you might use. Active listening techniques. The use of visual representation, for example, I know where there might be a case conference about perhaps a child who is too young to attend the meeting, where you might bring in a photograph of the child or a favourite teddy bear of the child, so that everybody that's talking about the child doesn't lose sight of the child. That's a particular method that you're using, and that could be drawn from a share model to ensure that people still see the child in the situation, for example. So these are all methods. Triangulation is a method that we talked about in the theory picnic webinar. So I've just given you a kind of gallop through essentially 3 years of social work training in 25 minutes. I mean, that's literally all the kinds of theories, models, methods. And we're not going to be, you know, I can't go into detail about all of those in a session of this length, but I wanted to introduce for you, these are some of the approaches and models and methods to try and illustrate what I mean by an approach sits at your heart, a theory sits at your head, and models and methods sit in your hands and the tools that you put into your hands. But if you wanted more on those, or you want to look at them or explore them more, I would definitely recommend social work theory cards. I know a lot of people in our audience have those social work theory cards, but all of the things that I've talked about tonight are in those cards, and you would find them in there. So that's given you some examples, some ideas of what a theory, a model, a method, an approach might be. So we're going to go now into a much more practical way of looking at this. We're going to now, and this is where I have to be careful about, we're not sharing our bodies as such, but we are going to share with you, I'm going to share with you a specific body of theory that you would use with a particular person, how you would develop that. Kulchuma and Becky are going to share with you developing bodies of theories that fit for particular placement contexts. But we're going to start off with Dave talking to us about how you could build a general body of theory. So here, this is about how you might just build, this is me, if you like, here I am, this is me, these are the kinds of approaches that I like to take to my practice, these are the theories that I would like to normally draw on, and these are the models and the methods that I use. So this is what Dave has produced. Here is a picture of Dave's body of theory, and I'm going to hand over to Dave now. I'm going to go on mute, Dave, and hand over to you.
Thank you. So just briefly before we do this, it's important to remind the audience that I live in Scotland and haven't actually had a placement yet. So that's why I can't do a specific body of theory, and that's why mine's is a general body of theory. We're supposed to go into placement next year, but because of COVID, we won't. So this is just really far in advance development for me. So for my, you can see it's all here, it's pointing to my head and stuff, but my thinking is when I go into practice or placement, I want to try and be working from a sort of sociological approach. I want to be working with people on a person by person basis. I want to commit my time to them. So the way that I would aim to do that is, here my thinking was using Erikson's and Maslow's stages of development, or their needs. Obviously Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Erikson's the stages of development, and that will allow me, regardless of who I'm working with, whether I'm placed with the elderly or whether I'm placed with infants, it will allow me to gain a better understanding of where the person's at in their life. He says, confidently hoping. For my heart, my overall approach, when I was talking to Siobhan about this, I think I'd identified this, and I'm not sure if it's overconfident, but everything I do is person-centered. I do my best to be an empowering force in someone's life. Whether I manage it or not, I don't know. I come from a relationship-based practice angle, and try and work individually with the person, and it could be two siblings together who come from the same background and the same family, but they are different people, so it's important to come from a person-centered approach. And strengths-based approaches, I find I'd only learned about this in last year in uni, and I think it's fantastic working with people to highlight. They could be in a really bad situation, but there will always be something good to highlight, and the impact that has on people is just profound. So I think if you've never heard of strengths-based approaches, go and have a look at it. For my, sorry, I'll run along. For my hands and my model that I like to use is co-production, community work type models and pedagogy, which Siobhan mentioned earlier. And that's just that whole thing, again, of working with people and trying to eke out a relationship and build the strengths that they already have, they just aren't sure of, or they're so beaten down by the way they're living or what's happened in their life, not through any fault of their own, but they need rebuilding. They need built back up into the amazing human that they are. And for my methods, my plan, now I may choke when I enter placement and absolutely cower it out, but I won't, because I have you guys. My plan is to just try and I've put empathic listening and open listening because I feel they're different things. I think empathic listening is all about hearing what someone's telling you and responding in an appropriate way, whereas open listening, you could just be listening and taking notes. So I think you have to combine both to make sure you're being proactive with the people you're working with and being respectful enough to respond appropriately. And the other one is just good open communication, because there's nothing worse than working with someone. And obviously we will have a power imbalance, so I will have to try and communicate constantly with the person to make sure they know what's going on, and in the case that we're working together. So that's my general body of theory. And I think the reason I hadn't considered before building this, I'd considered them all and their strengths by themselves, but putting them together, it creates a sort of robust approach to practice in itself, because you can lean on Erikson's 8 stages, but if you don't actually have an approach as to how to implement it, then you're going to fall at your first hurdle. So that's my thinking. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope it made sense.
You absolutely did, Dave. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that. And you know what, I really loved the way I just gave a quick explanation of the activity and you all went off in different ways with it. But what I think is really good is because you've not yet gone on placement, have you, Dave? So you're at the stage of your social work training where you've done lots of the teaching and learning, but you've not, you go into placement in 3rd year in Scotland. And so as yet you've not done placement. And what I think is really interesting, and you didn't do it on purpose at all, but the fact that your hand is in your pocket there. So where I've drawn the hand to the arrow to your hand's actually in your pockets. And I was thinking it's really interesting because it's almost like you've not yet gone out to have a go. So the models are what you think you're going to use, but you don't really know, do you? But I think even before you start, even before you go into placement, you can start to think about the theories that really make sense for me. These are the ones that have kind of clicked in my head, if you like. These are the approaches. This is what heart I want to take into my practice. And I think that means when you go into your first placement, you've really started to think about theory already and how you're building all of this together and how you're going to bring your whole self into theory informed practice. So for those students who are here now who are 1st year students, haven't yet been on placement, I think following the way that Dave's done this would be a really good way for you to think about and preparing for going into first placement, to really start to pull together how's theory, how do I bring my whole self into theory. So thank you for that, Dave. That was great. Thank you. So we're going to go on now to look at, and I can't get the slides to move for some reason. There we go. We're going to go on to look at how you can build a body of theory which is context specific. So where Dave has done for us, here's a general one. Here's a before I've even gone out onto any placement kind of body of theory. What we're going to look at now is a context specific body. So if you were to look at, for example, I know I'm going to be going into a placement in this setting. What kind of approach is going to work well in this setting? What theories am I going to draw on? What models might work in the setting? And what methods am I going to use when I'm there? And so I think we're going to start off with Kulchuma, who's going to tell us about a context-specific body of theory in a school setting. So Kulchuma, I'm going to go on mute and hand over to you.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Sorry if I mumble quite a bit. I get a bit nervous when I'm talking live. No idea why. So apologies in advance. So as Siobhan said, I'm going to be talking about a body of theory based on a school context. When I first got told I'd be doing my first placement at a school, I did think, well, it's not your traditional sort of placement. How would that benefit me? What sort of theories would I apply? And I initially thought of the standard sort of, you know, the 8 stages of development and attachment. But once I'd actually started my placement, I started to think more in depth, and that's when I started to think, actually, the systems theory is very relevant, because in a school they have so many different environments that actually affect the young people. So, you know, I started thinking about the systems theory and the social learning theory as well, because it's a totally different environment for them to learn in. So they've got the environment at home where they learn, you know, their values and beliefs in the home, and then they've got the social environment where they're learning things from their peers and from their friends as well. So you've got to take that into account. And then one that I didn't even think about was the psychodynamic, which reflects on the experiences that they've had previously. Now, I've come into this setting and I don't know any of the children that I'm working with. I don't know the experiences that they've had. So those are some of the things that I've had to consider when I started working with them. And what I found really helped me to sort of build that good rapport with the young people was by having a child/person-centered approach, just by putting them in the center of everything and making them the focus of the talk and looking at what their needs are and, you know, the support and things that they may need. Really helped to sort of open them up, and also having a trauma-informed approach, because a lot of the children that we've worked with within the school, they've faced a lot of, you know, trauma, especially quite recently because of the COVID pandemic. So, you know, you've got to be really mindful of the things that have impacted on the young people and maybe are continuing to impact on them, and then to have a restorative approach, because of those issues they may have had relationship breakdowns with their families or with their friends, and it's about supporting them to sort of build those relationships up and, you know, to try and understand what happened and why that might have happened, and just giving them a bit of a narrative and something to think about as well. And in terms of the model, these are some things, you know, I hadn't actually even thought about. I mean, grief and loss is one that I thought I might have to use, but not as much as I am because of the pandemic. Like, I've started my placement straight after when lockdown lifted and schools reopened, and there was a lot of children that had experienced death within the family because of the pandemic. So I found that is something that I've had to rely on quite a lot to support the children that I'm working with. And another method is signs of safety, which is a brilliant method because it's applicable to children of all ages, especially working in a school setting. Because you're working with children from so many different age groups, you've got to have a method that you can work use and adapt to meet the needs of everybody. So the signs of safety is a brilliant model, because it's about 3 houses, and you can either provide them a template or you can give them an activity to draw the 3 houses, and that usually sort of helps them to sort of settle in and, you know, sort of get comfortable with the environment and comfortable with yourself as well. And crisis intervention is another one that we've become heavily reliant on because of the pandemic. We've had, you know, children that have come in that have had, you know, more issues that have crept up during lockdown, or, you know, from their previous experiences. So it's having that understanding and how you can apply that within your practice. And for my tool, I couldn't think of it then, but for my tool, I said to Siobhan, could we sort of highlight the bag, because in a school you work with so many children that have so many different needs, that are learning at so many different levels. You've got to be able to adapt to everything that you use to meet their needs. So for some young people, I might look at playing games with them. So we have a game where we've got Jenga, for example. Other brands are available. And what we've done on the blocks is we've typed out questions and we've stuck them on the actual block. So when the young person picks out a block, they've got to then answer that question. And because I'm working with them, when it's my turn, I will also answer the questions, being mindful of, you know, not oversharing, and, you know, being mindful of the professional boundaries as well. And those are really brilliant ways of engaging with the young person. I mean, I've seen online you can buy these blocks and dice with the questions on, but I just think if you can use the sort of equipment that you've got and make it yourself, you can target it towards your audience, you know, because when you're buying them, they're just generic and they may not cover the sort of topics that you want to cover. So you can use the sort of equipment that you've got to do that. And working in a school has really helped me to think outside the box and think about so many different theories that are so relevant to a school that you wouldn't even think of. So I hope that's really helped you to understand how a school setting can teach you so much as a social worker.
Thank you, Kulchuma. It absolutely has. And I've been a practice educator for students in schools, and yet I still learn from your presentation there about I think as you were talking about COVID and the impact of COVID on children, I was really thinking about how that's going to be an incredibly important place for social workers to be at the moment, actually, in schools with children. So, and the photograph is fabulous, and the tool, the fact that you had a bag in your hand, I think it's better than a tool. You haven't got like a screwdriver in your hand, you've got a glossy, glittery handbag, which actually looks much nicer. So that was fabulous. Thank you very much for that, Kulchuma. And then we're going to go on into Becky is going to share now her context specific body of theory in a different placement setting to give us an idea of how you can still bring your whole self of theory into different contexts. So I'm going to hand over to Becky now. There we go.
I'm just thinking, Dave's got a lovely trim photo of himself. Kulchuma's looking stunning, and I've got this like really daft pair of like clogs I'm trying to step into in Amsterdam. That doesn't really look right. I'm just like, what did I send that in for? Anyway, yeah, so in my second year, my 80-day placement, I was actually I settled in one prison, but I was working across 3 prisons originally. And it was quite an unusual setting. I don't think many social work students get that opportunity. So when I was thinking about it initially, and I had you know, the visits and, you know, training and everything that I needed to have for that, I couldn't really think of it. I couldn't really approach it in the same way because obviously it's not a community setting, you know, and there were just so many sort of safety aspects that I needed to take in. So the way I kind of approached it was just to kind of get in there and then figure it out, which might be a bit back to front. So where my head comes into it was that I kind of got in and I've never been in a situation like that before. I've never been in that kind of setting before. And it was really quite overwhelming because, you know, it was almost a bit Victorian, like I was locked in, you know, I was having to, you know, be very careful about things. And I quickly noticed that, you know, that the main kind of theories that sprang to mind for me were conflict. You know, there was an awful lot of conflict. You've got men being detained because of, you know, crimes that they've committed, and you've got a prison system in place, you know, having to impose quite, you know, well, very strict, you know, restrictions around the way that, you know, that the liberty has been restricted and the way that these people live their life. So as a result of that, obviously, naturally, systems theory came in, but it just came in a very strange way, which led me to then think more about discourse analysis. And I didn't really know much about discourse analysis, to be honest, and it's still one that I have to go back to, but it became quite prevalent for me because of the language. You know, I really found that I had to challenge the language. I had to question quite a lot. I wasn't used to being called Miss. I didn't particularly like being called Miss. I wanted people to call me by their name, but it was almost a very foreign thing for the men in there. I also wanted to call the men that I was supporting by their first names, and that was quite unusual. They'd very quickly become accustomed to being called a number or their surname. So there was confusion for me a lot of the time because I wasn't sure if that was you know, I had to keep going back and checking what the person's actual name was, and check that I wasn't actually calling them their surname, because that's how somebody else had referred to them. So my heart, I suppose, then came into, in Wales, everything we do is guided by this one massive bit of legislation called the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act, which came into place in 2014. There's quite a lot of principles in it. I took 3 from it in particular, and they fit really nicely with being outcome focused, being person centered, and being solution focused, because there's 5 main principles within the Act, but 3 of them in particular are about the well-being, obviously, of the people that you're supporting, making sure that there's voice and control, that the child or the person, who, you know, the adult, that their voice is heard in every piece of work that you do. You get that across who that person is, and you hear their voice. And then finally, co-production and sort of multi-agency working is a massive thing within Wales and everything we do. So I kind of thought, okay, well, I can, you know, yes, there's restrictions, yes, I'm in a prison setting, but there are still things that I can do, and I can, you know, my approach has always been, you know, to try and be solution focused. So that kind of like leads me on to the, you know, I can't, obviously confidentiality, I can't go into too much of what was happening, but that I noticed that there was a gap in the service, and I was there trying to strengthen family ties between the men and their family, their children, their wives, but particularly sort of their children, that were, you know, at home, but were still trying to maintain a relationship. And some of them, the children with disabilities in particular, were finding that very difficult, because coming into a prison environment for a visit, you know, it's very alien, it's very difficult. But for a child with autism, for a child with any kind of disability, the prison isn't, you know, it wasn't set up for that. It was set up for children. It wasn't set up for specific, you know, children with disabilities. So I've kind of referred a little bit to a Hackney model. Again, I didn't know too much until I started getting into it about the changes, I think that Isabel Trowler had brought about and stuff, but I didn't kind of go in there thinking I was going to make this great change. But I noticed a gap in service, and I noticed that children, you know, were, you know, they weren't being listened to, you know, and there were real problems starting. So I just kind of thought about the things that I could do, and I started working with some of the families. I started listening to them. I started listening to how things could be improved, and in the end, we changed some of the way that the visits were actually structured, and we brought about I brought about some specific visits for the children with disabilities. So that hadn't been done before. I didn't know how to do it, so I basically had to design it all by myself, with the help of the families saying this would work, that would work. But I had to where the co-production came in was I had to work quite strongly with the, you know, the prison setting themselves and see what was safe, what they would approve. But a large part was the misunderstanding, and there's not very many social workers within a prison setting. They do, you know, what I kind of found initially was that everybody was working separately and doing their own jobs, and, you know, and I had to kind of find a way to get everybody to work together and listen and be respectful. So I designed some training, basically. So I put together a training package. I delivered that training myself to the prison officers, and then slowly they gained an understanding of what these families might be going through, and what the children were finding difficult, and then we were able to change things together. So yeah, I kind of and it kind of worked. I got the approval from the prison officer. We managed, before the end of my placement, we managed to run some of these visits, and I, you know, design questionnaires and things for the children and the families, and it all kind of like came together. But I definitely didn't go in there thinking this is what I'm going to do with my placement. I really didn't. It just kind of like happened because of being solution focused and kind of thinking, right, okay, this isn't working, but there's not the stereotypical way of, you know, social work. I've got to find another way. So yeah, I just kind of did that, really. So I'm not sure if I've waffled a little bit there, Siobhan, or whatever, but I think mine was a little bit different. So I had to just be creative, really.
You haven't waffled at all, Becky. Thank you very much. That showed your body of theory contextualized into the prison setting, but also where you've said you didn't like your picture with the big clogs. I thought it was a fabulous one, because what I thought the clogs would represent is you very much put yourself in the shoes of family members, didn't you? So there was a lot of empathy going on there. And I think, you know, where Dave talked earlier about empathic listening as one of his methods, I think that was one of your methods, empathic listening as well. So I think where each of the three of you have put down your body of theory, there's also lots of other bits of theory, bits of methods that you've used, but I think you've gone about the activity really well. And I think what you've done is, I tried to do this with you where we just had a few minutes where I explained the thing to you, didn't I? I didn't go through it with you because I wanted to see what you would come up with. But what you've developed there, if you'd taken that to a practice educator to present that in supervision, you know, here is what I'm doing, here is how I'm using theory, I think they're really good bodies of theory that you've developed. So thank you so much for sharing those context bodies. And I know that they will have helped people in the audience listening who are on placement, and sometimes on placements that are, if you like, a non-traditional placement setting. And I think both a school and a prison are non-traditional placement settings, but have such a lot of, you know, such richness of learning. And I think you've brought that out. So thank you to all three of you for sharing your bodies of theory and following up after that funny conversation we had in the WhatsApp group, where I was like, why are they all being, why is that question, do you want to share your body, a strange question? And then I realized what it was. So thank you very much for that. I think what, especially what Becky and Kulchuma's presentations have demonstrated is that the theory body isn't just about you, you know, the person in the middle there, with the heart and the tool. It's also about the context that you work in. So it's also about the hat that you're wearing, isn't it? So what kind of hat are you wearing? So what a social work student does in a prison, or what a social work student does in a school, they're going to be quite different things. So you're going to draw on different bodies of theory. Kulchuma is going to go into her final placement, and she may not be using the same theories and the same approaches and the same models. Her body, her theory body, will change a lot in her second placement, in just the same way that Becky's theory body changed when she went into working in a different placement setting. So I think it's really important to recognize that your theory body isn't just you, it's also the context that you're in, or the hat that you wear. And when I was thinking about that, it made me reflect on a story that I just wanted to share with you, because this is a story that illustrates that more than anything else ever has done in my career, if you like. And this relates back to many years ago now. I was a practice educator for a student who was working actually in a healthcare setting. So this was a particular it was a mental health unit in a hospital. It was a new build part of the hospital, and it was for older adults with mental health issues. Predominantly, most of the people that were there had dementia. And it was a it was a beautiful building. It was, everybody had single ensuite rooms built around a courtyard. So, you know, because it was new build, it was very fabulous building, if you like. And she was the social work student there. There was no social worker in the setting. So she was doing very much what Becky was doing, trying to find her way. But I was her practice educator. And I remember very, very vividly doing a direct observation of this student who was, she was in a multidisciplinary meeting. So they were called the ward MDM, and all of the different professionals came together to talk about the people that were living on the unit. And this was this is literally word for word the conversation that went on in this multidisciplinary meeting, which I think illustrates how everybody's different hats, different bodies comes out of it. So there was a conversation that was happening. It was about an older man who had dementia. It was quite advanced. He wasn't verbal at this point, but he had been, he was in his room. Everybody had their own single room, as I said, ensuite room, and he was moving the furniture around a lot in his room and pushing it up against the door so that people couldn't get into his room. But he was also, when he was in the other parts of the building, he was also just moving furniture into very difficult areas. It was creating a lot of difficulty within the ward environment. So they were having this discussion as part of the multidisciplinary meeting, and this is how it went. The consultant started off, because consultants always do, because they're the people with the power. He started off and he said, look, I think this is a deterioration in the man's condition. His needs are changing. We need to increase his medication. So that was his view, very succinct. The psychologist went next, and the psychologist talked about his view that the man was trying to indicate that he wanted privacy, that he wanted to be alone. He was pushing up, so he wanted privacy, and that it was important to make sure that all staff knocked on the doors. And so that was his. So I suppose what I'm trying to give you is how he understood it was about privacy, and therefore what his head said, this is privacy. His hands said, we all need to knock on the door. Whereas the consultant's head said, this is an illness, and the hands where we just need to give you more medication. There was a nurse, a specialist nurse, who said it was something about the stage of dementia that the man was at, and it was aggression, and he was bringing out the aggression through the furniture. There was an occupational therapist who said something along the lines of, she felt that the man needed to have activities to do, and she really wanted to involve him in the gardening group that went on in the courtyard. And then the student that I was observing really lacked confidence, and very, very quietly at the end of all of these discussions said that she'd been involved in the admission meeting. She'd supported this man's admission, and she'd spoken to his family at quite some length, and the family had found it very difficult, the man coming in, and up until very recently he'd run his own business, and he'd been very, you know, very influential in this business, and it was a family business, and they all worked in the family business, and it'd been a big issue, and the business was furniture removal. And she wondered whether maybe the man was just doing what he'd always done when he went into a new place, moving furniture. Now, I listened into all of that, and I know how I understood it. I know I'd never met the man, but I know what made sense to me in terms of understanding. But why I shared that story with you is to show that all of those different professionals were looking at it from a completely different angle. Their head told them different things. Their heart was in different places, and their hands would take different actions. So I'm trying to show for you here that theory isn't just something that we read in a book. Theory is about how we understand and how we approach and what we do in situations. So you can also develop a context-specific body of theory. I've also, as I've been listening to Kulchuma and to Becky's presentation as well, I was also thinking about, okay, so maybe we could do a time-specific body of theory as well. How does your body of theory change in the middle of a global pandemic, for example, you know, because with what Kulchuma was showing, so you could even change that. But the final example that I want to share with you is how you could develop a specific body to work with a particular person. So in this piece of work, this is how I'm going to go about it. What I was thinking, so if you're thinking about a particular family you're working with or a particular individual you're working with, think about what's your overall approach to the piece of work you've been given. How do you understand what's happening? What are you doing? What specific methods does that involve? But I was thinking to myself, okay, well, confidentiality. I don't want to come here and talk about a real person that one of us is working with. How am I going to do this? I want it to be real. I don't want it to be made up. So how do I do it? And then I decided, okay, just turn this around, Siobhan. It doesn't have to be you as the social worker working with somebody. What about you as the service user? So many of you, if you've been to our sessions before, will know that I had a stroke a number of years ago. I was in hospital for quite a long time. I went through stroke reablement. I received social work services. So I was thinking about myself as, you know, a 45-year-old woman who's had a stroke. It's a major stroke. She's in hospital. She's described as a non-compliant patient. I love that phrase. I was always described in that way. So, you know, this is me. what would I have liked? What body of theory would I have liked the social workers or the social care workers working with me to use? And this is the body that I developed. I would have wanted them to come at this with very much a hopeful approach. I wanted them to be relationship based. I wanted them to be interested in me, take a narrative approach and try to understand my story and where I was coming from. And actually, all of those approaches connect together, because what mattered to me, what really mattered to me when I had my stroke, was how I was going to get back to work. That was what really mattered to me, because social work is my life and I wanted to get back to social work. It was really important for me. It meant that I needed to relearn to read and write, for example, all of those things that I've shared with you and told you about before. But what professionals would say to me is, you've just got to come to terms with what's happened to you. You're never going to be able to go back to work. That's the message that I heard. I wanted them to hold hope for me, because the more that they told me that, the less hopeful that I was. And I needed people around me to be hopeful. So I wanted people who had a heart of being hopeful, who wanted to hear my story and understand my narrative and be person-centered and relationship-based in the way they went about working with me. I would have liked them to understand and use attachment theory, because I had, I'm very close attachment to my children, to my husband, who wasn't my husband at the time, but there were lots of those issues there around my relationships, and I wanted them to understand the importance of those relationships and how attachments worked and why I was responding in particular ways within those relationships. I would have liked them to use Levinson's Seasons of Human Development, because whilst I like Erikson, I think particularly when you're looking at some issues around particular very close age, I really wanted them to understand the seasons and the way in which I was going through those seasons. I wanted them to understand grief and loss and how, I was losing a great deal in this experience whilst I'm in a stroke unit. And I also wanted them to understand social constructionism and the way in which language constructs things. And I've talked to you about this before, but things like, I wanted them to stop talking about feeding, because why use the word feeding? Because it's a construct and it's dehumanizing and all of those things. So I wanted them to use an understanding. I wanted their head to really understand what it means to hear that kind of language used about you. I wanted people to use an exchange model of assessment to really involve me fully in the assessment, to understand my perspective. And at that point, my verbal communication was laboured. It took a long time, but I was able to fully participate in the assessment. They might have needed to use visual techniques to aid communication, and that's a method I would have liked them to use. That was what, the tools in their hands. I wanted them to use a personal recovery model to understand that recovery means different things to different people and how to see that. I wanted them to use task-centered practice to understand and develop an agreement between us about what they would do as professionals and what I would do as a service user and what my family members would do as my informal carers. I wanted us to work together and co-produce something. So maybe I should have put co-production in here as well. And then in the methods, the tools I've already mentioned, the use of visual techniques to aid communication, but also I wanted them to ask me what matters questions, questions like, what matters to you? We heard Becky talking earlier about Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and that's very much about what matters to the individual person. So what matters questions. So that's the specific work body of theory. What would I have wanted from a social worker working with me? And that's how I went about developing a specific piece of work body of theory. Now, I'm suggesting to you, as a student social worker, you could develop your body of theory around a particular person that you're working with. You could also develop a context body like Kulchuma and Becky did earlier on. But bringing a body of theory, starting to really think about developing a body of theory, it's really about getting comfortable in your own skin. That's what it is. Getting comfortable in your skin as a social worker so that you know what kind of approach do you want to take to this work. different social workers take different approaches. What makes you comfortable? Nobody wants a professional skeleton. So, you know, you need the skin on the bones here. University, reading, all of that. It gives you the bare bones of theory. But you now need to bring your whole self to the use of that theory, to put the skin on the bones, to flesh it out, to bring all the stuff, to put the clogs on your feet, if that's what you want to do, to really own that body of theory. And of course, we've talked tonight about the head, heart, hands of theory and using that as an initial starting framework, but you can add to your body. You know, we don't only use theory in social work, do we? We also use wider knowledge. We also, you know, so we don't just draw on our head, our heart and our hands. We draw on our eyes, our mouth, our ears, our gut, our feet, everything. You draw on your values and your ethics. You draw on your senses, your gut instinct, maybe even your soul. It's not just your heart, but it's also your soul. Remember, we did a webinar on spirituality, and maybe we bring our soul into our practice. But be careful of your knee-jerk reactions. And you can go further, can't you, with your body analogy? But there's your full-on body that you use as a social worker. So as we start to conclude tonight's webinar, what I really wanted us to start to think about is how we bring our whole self to our practice as social workers. You can't bring your whole self effectively to practice without drawing on theories to understand, models to intervene, and methods, techniques, and an overall approach, an overall way of going about it. I think breaking things down and exploring your body of theory, or your head, your heart, and your hands can really help you to bring your whole self to practice. And that's what tonight's been about. I'm hoping that it's helped you. I'm just looking in the Q&A, and there are no questions in the Q&A. So maybe you'll send us some questions, I don't know, by our email address. But this is very much your whole body of theory. So that was tonight's Back to Basics session. Before we close, I do just want to tell you about what we've got coming up. This is really important. I know lots of you often pop off and think, oh, well, I'll get this on the emails later. But actually, it's really important that you know next week's session will not be on YouTube. It will only be available for live participation. And it's a fabulous, fabulous multisensory session led by the Samurai social worker. So Ian Lawrence, who joined us, if you remember, for our recording webinar, and people were just fascinated by what he shared with us there. He's going to take the whole night to take us on a multi-sensory journey around experiences of mental health. That is not going to be available on YouTube. It will not be recorded. It will be available only for live attendance, and I really would recommend it. It's a fabulous session. The following week, we will be joined by Caroline Aldridge. I'm reading her book at the moment. It's one of the best books that I've read in many, many years, and beautifully written. If you want to learn how to write reflectively, read the book. But she's going to come along and talk to us about the book, and I think she's also going to offer a discount for people who are there. So don't buy the book yet in case she does. Then we're going to do professional kindness, and then big drum roll, our huge celebration. Those of you who are here, even if you're a first year student, even if you're not going to graduate this year, come to that huge celebration, because the stories that are coming out that we're going to be sharing about social workers' student journeys through the pandemic, they are captivating and inspirational, and you will want to be at that event. So that's what we've got coming up over the next few weeks. So that's kind of our webinars in June, and then we have one more after that, and then we're going to be taking a break for the summer. But thank you very much. Thank you very much to Becky and to Kulchuma and to Dave for sharing your bodies of theory tonight. Did you notice I got the of theory in there? Thank you ever so much, and thank you very much to to all the audience who've been here. Thank you very much to everybody, and good night.